Good evening. We're here to commemorate the centenary of the shootings at the Shannon View Hotel in Castleconnell on the 17th of April 1921. In that awful incident, there were 3 casualties. Dennis O'Donovan, the owner of the hotel, an RIC Sergeant Hughes, who was drinking in the hotel, and a young cadet, Pringle, an English lad. Now, it might be just one of the great catalogue of atrocities that happened at that time, mainly perpetrated by the auxiliaries and the Black and Tans. But this one took on particular significance because there was a guest staying in the hotel, William Harrison Cripps, coming from an old English family, Scottish roots. He was president of the Royal College of Surgeons in London. His brother was Lord Palmer, and then 2 Home Rule Bills, Gladstone's Bill of 1885, and the 20th century. They finally had to pass the 3rd Home Rule Bill of 1913 because the government had withdrawn their veto. And bills which had passed. Now, Mr. Cripps had said that he witnessed it, he and his wife witnessed the whole thing and were probably lucky not to have been shot, and had said that the auxiliaries had behaved like demented Red Indians. This is probably an insult to Red Indians. At this time, in an immediate sitting of the House of Lords following the shooting at Castleconnell, Mr. Cripps's brother, Lord Parmore, insisted on speaking and read letters that he'd had from his brother, where his brother described the events in graphic detail and talked about the totally excessive behavior of the auxiliaries and the Black and Tans that they went through, that they put revolvers to his chest and to his wife's chest. In what followed, there was an exchange of fire, and they exchanged fire with the 3 policemen, the 3 RIC men who were drinking at the bar. And when they produced their guns, the RIC men also produced their revolvers. And this is why they said that they were Sinn Féiners. And Sergeant Hughes was shot in that incident. And also a young police cadet, a man called Pringle from London, who died instantly. Normally, after all the earlier atrocities, there were inquiries which were totally fabulous affairs. There was a total whitewash of events. But Lord Palmer insisted on reading his brother's letters, which described the events so graphically, and he called for an independent public inquiry. In the event that didn't come, but it had substantial publicity in the Lords, and that changed things forever. This truly was the catalyst that led to the truce negotiations and finally the treaty. All sorts of things. So then, the Chief Secretary for Ireland, an intellectual giant, Sir Hammer Greenwood, he in the House of Commons had said that the Sinn Féiners were now becoming so desperate that they put out stories that they'd given orders to execute some of their friends who were and colleagues who weren't towing the line, and this would have been to present that the two mayors of Limerick, Alderman Clancy and Alderman O'Callaghan, who'd been shot a few weeks previously, were shot by their own. Also, Thomas McCurtain in Cork, and of course the burning of Cork, which they said was set afire by locals with their half gallons of paraffin, when in fact the place looked like a bomb site from the First World War. And after that, there were various stations, and for the narrative, I'll hand you over to Tom Toohey, who is the local historian of the War of Independence.
Thank you, Henry. To give a brief overview of what happened in Castleconnell on the 17th of April 1921. In fact, you could say the story begins in Newport. 3 RI seamen, Sergeant Hughes, Constable Morrison, and Constable Talbot had 8 or 10 hours leave. So they decided, it was a fine day, and they decided they would cycle to Killaloe and come back by Castleconnell. Main reason being that on Sundays in Ireland, in those times, one couldn't drink a pint in their local public house. You had to go, as I say, outside the 3-mile limit. So it precluded the 3 RI seamen from having a drink in Newport. They set out for Killaloe, had a few pints in Killaloe, and then decided to come back by Castleconnell. They came to Castleconnell sometime in the evening, probably around 5 o'clock, and went into the Shannon Inn. While they were in the Shannon Inn, it would appear, now it has never been confirmed, it has never been fully proven, but it would appear that someone of an Irish persuasion spotted them and mistook them for IRA. The auxiliaries in Killaloe never admitted getting a phone call, but if you put all the facts together, you cannot come to any other conclusion, because they arrived on about 7 o'clock. Now, if they were going to on a normal raid, they'd hardly be doing it at 7 o'clock on an April evening. When the auxiliaries came to Castleconnell, Captain Wood, who was in charge, had briefed them beforehand, and he had about 12 or 15 men in civilian clothes. They were to go into the village first and go in around the Shannon Hotel. The reason being that the information that they had was to the effect that the IRA were using the Shannon Hotel. When they arrived in Castleconnell, they walked up the street into the hotel. Someone went to the hotel. The first men that came in apparently were Cadet Thomas Briggs, John Morrison, and Leslie Shiner, in addition to Captain Wood. Now, they were supposed to go into the hotel and mingle and just observe, but they didn't. They rushed in shouting, "Hands up." The 3 policemen, off-duty policemen inside in the bar, Hughes, Morrison, and Talbot, immediately slammed the door closed and opened fire. One of the auxiliaries, Donald Pringle, presented himself at the window looking in, and it would appear that Constant Morrison opened fire and killed Pringle. The firing continued, and Sergeant Hughes was mortally wounded. It seems that it was Leslie Shiner, who opened fire and killed Hughes. Shiner was from Bristol. He had a brother, Gordon Shiner, also in the auxiliaries in Killaloe. We don't know that Gordon was there that day, but certainly Leslie was there. As I say, Leslie came from Bristol. He was born originally in Staffordshire, but his father was a principal of a public school in Bristol. He opened fire and killed Sergeant Hughes. The auxiliaries then brought up a machine gun and opened fire. Now that forced the two policemen inside to surrender, Morrison and Talbot. Now they were told to throw out your guns and come out with your hands up. And also, but Dennis O'Donovan was forced to come out as well. He had been serving them inside in the bar. When they emerged out into the yard at the back of the pub, the auxiliaries continued firing. They were at this stage convinced that they had trapped a group of IRA. And the reason for shooting Dennis O'Donovan, who was shot, it would appear, by Henry Splatt. The reason for shooting O'Donovan was that he was harboring rebels. Constable Talbot, however, recognized one of the auxiliaries. And very soon it became clear of the mix-up that had occurred. And the order was given for a ceasefire. Unfortunately, it was of no use to Dennis O'Donovan, who was wounded at least 6 times. And he was dying in the backyard. Dr. Ryan was sent for, and he came to attend to Dennis O'Donovan, but unfortunately, he was of no use. As I said, Sergeant Hughes had been killed inside in the bar, and Cadet Pringle had been killed on the street outside. Now, Cadet Pringle's friend was Henry Splatt. And Splatt was the man, as I say, who shot Dennis O'Donovan. Splatt and Pringle both came from London. They both joined the auxiliaries on the same day. Their numbers were 79056 and 79057. When the mistake was realized, Dr. Ryan was sent for. At this stage, as I say, Dennis O'Donovan was still alive, if but barely. And he arrived on, and he testified that that O'Donovan had at least 4 to 6 wounds. At the court of inquiry, which was held a few days later, the key evidence was given by a number of people, especially made by the name of Margaret Wade. Margaret Wade was very damning in her evidence. She told very clearly that Dennis O'Donovan was taken out the backyard. The charge of harboring rebels was made against him, and he was shot. Now, Margaret Wade was put under pressure by the court of inquiry on a number of occasions to change her version of things, but she didn't. Now, what was interesting about Margaret Wade is I would believe that she's the only Margaret Wade appears in the 1911 census for Limerick. And she is mother to Harry Wade, who was killed at Castleconnell in December 1920. As I say, the evidence by Margaret Wade was not to the liking of the court of inquiry because it was projecting the auxiliaries in a very bad light. In addition, William Harrison Cripps a respected surgeon from London, was on holidays in Castleconnell fishing, and he observed what happened. In addition, he managed to pick up some dum-dum bullets that were used in the attack at Castleconnell, and these were presented on the floor of the House of Commons by his brother, Lord Paramore. After the shooting, the auxiliaries at this stage had realised their mistake, and dare I say it, an attempt to whitewash the situation went into overdrive. Constable Talbot was very lucky to escape. His evidence was at variance with Margaret Wade's, but it's obvious that he had been got to. Following the shooting following the shootings, Talbot and Morrison was seriously wounded, but he did survive. But neither of them gave damning evidence against the auxiliaries, but Margaret Wade did. The aspect of the follow-up will be covered by Chris Lynch. Thank you.
Our next speaker will be Professor Owen O'Malley, Professor of Politics in Dublin City University.
Thanks, Henry, and thanks, Tom. I'm not here in my capacity as a politics academic. I'm here because I'm the great-grandson of Dennis O'Donovan, the owner of the hotel. And my father, Des O'Malley, was meant to speak, but unfortunately he is unwell at the moment. When atrocities like this happen, as happened at the height of the War of Independence here in Castleconnell, they have a personal and a political impact. And obviously the political impact was probably not obvious, but it was important insofar as the things that Tom has alluded to, the impact on the debate about the British presence in Ireland and the British activities in Ireland were probably not believed before that, but when one of their own witnessed something and sees something at first hand, then it probably was something that started to turn the tide of British opinion on its activities in Ireland, and probably led to the hastening of the end of the Civil War and bringing about a truce that the British were willing to negotiate with the Irish side. Dennis O'Donovan himself was probably of a nationalist persuasion. He was from West Cork and would have been related to O'Donovan Rossa, and apparently attended O'Donovan Rossa's funeral, the kind of famous one with which Padraig Pearse spoke. But he was obviously a man who was able to get on well with all sides and all types, and was willing to chat to the RIC men, willing to have the kind of elite of British society, as the elite of British society did come to Castleconnell for its famous angling at the time. So there was a personal effect, obviously, of his murder or execution or killing, and that is he obviously left behind a widow. Dennis himself was 46 at the time. His widow would have been a little bit younger, but not much, and 4 children. And so 4 children, Mary was the eldest. She would have been in her kind of, I think, earlier mid-teens. Then Dermot, D.K. O'Donovan, and then my grandmother, Una. Una, the sort of person who probably didn't want to even admit she was alive at the time, and probably would have preferred to have had anybody believe that she was born in the late 1920s. But she didn't witness it. She was in Brewery with cousins at that time. But Mary who I would have known as Mary Heffernan. She grew up the road from me, or I grew up just down the road from her in Corbally. Mary Hef, she was, as the story goes, sent for the priest. And now the story in the family was that she had to run miles to get the priest, although if you look out the window, you can see that the church is directly across the road, and so she couldn't have had to run too far. But apparently it did deeply affect her. And again, the kind of family lore is that Mary Hef never smiled again. Because of the prominence of Dennis's murder, the British were forced to pay compensation to the family, which was quite significant. And it meant, in fact, that then Dermot and DK and Una could afford to be sent away to boarding school. And a couple of years later, Dermot and DK were in Castleconnell College in Dublin, St. Vincent's College in Castleconnell, where W.T. Cosgrave's son, Liam Cosgrave, later the Taoiseach, was also attended, and he was doing a prize giving ceremony a couple of years later, where he approached the two O'Donovan boys and told them that it was indeed their father's killing that did hasten the British willingness to call a truce and to start negotiation with the nationalists, the Irish side. So the odd thing, I suppose, about within a family was that it was never really spoken about. I don't think I ever saw my granny. I'm not sure if I ever asked her directly, but we kind of only vaguely knew about the nature of her father's death. But nobody, and I would have known Mary Heffernan, as she lived, his other daughter up the road, would have known her relatively well. But again, nobody ever spoke or asked about it. And my father probably could have used, I mean, in a political career when you were in Fianna Fáil, it would have been no harm to have had somebody being shot by the Black and Tans. But again, we never saw it being used for his political purposes. And so it was something that I don't think I'm not sure about Dermot or DK, but my father was saying that he doesn't remember any of them talking about their father's death. And it was something that they just kind of all closed down. Obviously had a political impact, but it also had a deep personal impact on those people. And I just wanted to show you a photo of, let's see if I can. There is Dennis O'Donovan there, which hopefully you'll be able to see, and his wife Agnes McNamara, or Agnes O'Donovan there. She stayed in the hotel for another 5 or 6 years running it, but by that stage, or no, another 10 years or so, but by that stage the Shannon scheme had been built, and it actually drained a lot of the water from the Shannon, and then the tourism market went as well, and so she ended up selling it, I think, in the early 1930s. So thank you for your time, and thanks again, Henry, for organising this.
And now we'll go over to Dublin. Nigel, are you there?
I'm here, yes.
Right. Nigel Warburton, who is the grandson of Sergeant Hughes, who unfortunately met his end in the Shannon Hotel on that awful day. Nigel.
Henry, and thank you sincerely for the invitation for me to join this Zoom meeting. It is much appreciated. My name is Nigel Warburton, and I'm a grandson of Sergeant William Hughes, who lived in Thurles in County Tipperary, was cycling home following a visit to his parents' hometown of Killaloe when he stopped at the Shannonview Hotel in Castleconnell for a drink. His in-laws, the Lewises, lived in the Waymaster's house on the Shannon navigation as his father Hughes joined the RIC in 1896 and had 25 years service. Whilst in the hotel, a platoon of auxiliaries arrived and opened fire on the hotel before entering the premises. We believe that William was killed in this first. Following his funeral, his family were moved by flyboat to Malahide, County Dublin, to live in a safe house. His family consisted of his widow, Posey, christened Mary Ann, and her 6 children, of which my mother was the youngest. They considered that it was unsafe to continue living in Thurles and felt that it was also unsafe to travel by rail. So they travelled by flyboat to a safe house in Malahide, County Dublin. Posey had been working as a nurse in Barrington's Hospital in Limerick. William, Posey, and a son William, who had predeceased his father, are buried in St. Flannan's graveyard in Killaloe. Lock, County Roscommon, where her father William Lewis was lockkeeper before promotion to Killaloe. All the family except my mother continued to live out their days in the Malahide area. She, however, moved to the South Wicklow area, and none of them ever emigrated. However, his grandchildren are spread between Australia, Canada, Ireland, and the Netherlands. May we remember all involved and their families. Thank you.
Thank you, Nigel. And now I'll invite Christopher Lynch from the local Historical Society to speak.
Good evening, everyone. I think at the outset, I'd say it's very interesting to hear from the family members involved. It gives a very personal perspective on the impact of this tragedy on actual individuals. The War of Independence and the commemorations that are happening over the last few years tend to have a predominant focus on 1920 as the year of atrocities such as Kilmichael, or well, incidents such as Kilmichael, Bloody Sunday, the hunger strike of Terence McSweeney and his death, and to a large degree 1921 is somewhat forgotten, but actually 1921 was probably the most violent, most difficult year of the war up until the truce on the 11th of July 1921. The atrocities and the rate of atrocities and incidents increased dramatically. The level of fatalities increased dramatically, and you had increasingly large-scale engagements between the IRA and the British security forces. Incidents like Clonmult, Customs House being burned, Drumkeen here, which is only out the road from us, in which 11 RIC men lost their lives, and the violence was effectively spiraling out of control at that stage. So in the context of serious atrocities and serious incidents in which large-scale loss of life occurred, which was increasingly frequent in 1921, the incident at Castleconnell was a relatively minor one in those terms, in that, without diminishing the sadness of what happened, 3 people lost their lives, and in the ordinary course of events, it would have passed away unremarked. But it didn't pass away unremarked for a number of reasons. Firstly, there was no IRA involvement in this incident, no Republican involvement whatsoever, and the incident effectively was an incident of the auxiliary forces being completely out of control, and the G Division, which were the division involved, who were based in the Lakeside Hotel at the time, had a horrendous record in the area. They'd been involved in the murder of 4 unarmed Republicans on the bridge in Killaloe in 1920. They were involved in the murder of the 2 mayors in Limerick. They were involved in numerous atrocities, burnings of houses, burnings of businesses, burnings of creameries, and these effectively were a unit that were out of control. And that's a view that was concurred with by their former leader, General Crozier, who actually resigned because he felt that he couldn't impose discipline on them as a force. And I think what we've heard about this incident indicates just how out of control they were. We're talking about a machine gun being used in a hotel where guests were staying, where staff worked, where ordinary people like Sergeant Hughes were having a drink. And we're talking about total disregard for the safety of everyone and anyone involved. Now, unknown to them, there was an X factor, and the X factor was William Harrison Cripps, 70 years of age at the time, a man who had been coming to Castleconnell for 50 years apparently for fishing expeditions and usually stayed in the Shannon Hotel. So he was a man who was well familiar with the area and a man who had a great love for the area, obviously, as did a significant percentage of the English upper classes, because Shannon, the fishery in the River Shannon at the time was at its peak and drew large members of the aristocracy on a frequent basis, many of whom would stay in the Shannon Inn or in Limerick hotels, but many of whom would be familiar with the Shannon Inn, and many of whom would be familiar with Dennis O'Donovan as well. So this was a familiar place for the establishment in England. It was somewhere that a lot of them were familiar with. And I think that this added to the sense of shock and horror that they felt when the details of this atrocity leaked out through Dr. Cripps. You've heard, obviously, that subsequently Dr. Cripps' brother, who was a very senior politician, had been a Tory politician for many years. In 1912, I believe, he transferred his allegiances to the Whigs, to the Liberals, and ultimately in 1923 ended up in the ranks of the Labour Party. But he was a very influential man and was a politician, obviously still in the House of Lords at the time. And he presented a profoundly disturbing version of events through the letters that his brother had sent about the incident and what he had witnessed of that incident. There's some very interesting information on this, and it's accessible online for free. If anyone's interested in looking at it, you can Google inquiry into 1921 shootings in Castleconnell, and you'll see the Hansard details in relation to the actual debate, in relation to Lord Parmore's speech, in which he outlines his brother's letter and what occurred on the date in question, and also the contributions from other members of the House of Lords. And what's very interesting, and I think gives credibility to this idea that this was something of a turning point, you can see the remarks and the contributions from a considerable number of the Lords and the House of Lords who are absolutely horrified by what has happened and feel a profound sense of shock at what had occurred. And I'll just quote from example from one of the, there was a number of contributions. There was one in particular from Lord Shandon. Sorry, there was one in particular, I should say, from Lord Morris. He stated, we have a situation here where organised crime, encouraged, sustained and supported by those who are supposed to be in custody of our lives and properties, and to which that has been entrusted. And then Lord Shandon, who would have been an Irish peer as well, stated, I'm strongly of the opinion, as are many others here, that and that I always maintained, I have to say, that I've been justified in my view that the establishment of irregular forces with complete lack of accountability was a complete error. And there's frequent other contributions from members of the House of Lords. And the sense you get from all of that is that there's a degree of shock, and there's also a degree of realization that the British government policy in this regard is becoming a complete failure and is actually inflaming the situation, not smothering it down and stamping out violence as was the intention originally. There was an immediate effect. I don't think it's any coincidence that even within a week or so of the letter, the former head of the auxiliaries, General Crozier, wrote to the government advising them that the situation was out of control and they needed to disband the auxiliaries effectively, and furthermore that they needed to start opening negotiations with the Republicans with the view to coming to a truce. And then on the 27th of April, there was a cabinet meeting, and at that meeting, Sir Hamer Greenwood, who was the Chief Secretary of Ireland and who was an unapologetic supporter of the auxiliaries and the Black and Tans up to this point, made it clear that he considered that government policy was a complete failure at this stage, and also that the issue of a truce would have to be pursued. So I don't think that's a coincidence. I think the fact that someone so close to them, someone that they would trust and they would consider of integrity, such as William Harrison Cripps, would not be misleading them. Now, with regard just briefly to the actual court inquiry that occurred with regard to Dennis O'Donovan's death, I think you can take it with a grain of salt. At that point, there was a situation whereby regular inquests had been replaced by effectively military inquests, military courts of inquiries. And the supposed reason for that was to prevent intimidation of juries and coroners. I think the real reason was the number of extremely unfavourable inquest results that have been returned by coroners all over Ireland with regard to a large number of atrocities that had occurred and for which British security forces were responsible. So effectively, it was a complete whitewash, this inquiry. Among the ridiculous things that concluded was that the operation is carried out by the auxiliaries. It's an operation in which 1,000 shots were fired, machine guns were used in a hotel. It was legitimate and proper. It also concluded apparently that all proper precautions were taken to protect Mr. and Mrs. Donovan. I think we can all agree about how laughable a contention that was. And even more laughable was the fact that it was decided that it was not necessary to bring across Sir William or William Harrison Cripps to give evidence to the Court of Inquiry. So I don't think we need to spend much more time on the worth of that as such. So I suppose in conclusion, to the family of the Warburtons, to the family of Sergeant Hughes, and to the O'Donovan's descendants, some of who were here this evening, including Owen, and also a granddaughter of Dennis O'Donovan is here with us this evening as well. I think in conclusion, it is some consolation to both of those families that given the trauma and the upset that their immediate families suffered as a result of this horrific tragedy, it is some consolation, I think, to all of them that their deaths weren't in vain, that ultimately this was a significant turning point, and ultimately it was a turning point that brought the British government to their senses and led them to realise that ultimately they would have to negotiate a truce to bring this awful cycle of violence to an end. I just want to thank everyone for joining us. Thank the Warburtons again. Thank the extended descendants of the O'Donovan's family, and thank everyone else who's tuned in with us this evening. Thank you very much.
Now, if anybody has any questions relating to it, we'll take questions for a few minutes.
Hi, how are you doing? Patrick Ryan here. This is, besides everything else, a message of goodwill from your neighbours up the road. I'm Patrick from the Newport Historical Society, your neighbours there. Like I said, the series of talks you've given this evening, it's been wonderful to hear that. It's been very, very well done, and particularly, as one of the speakers said, it's great to hear from the relatives and descendants of those involved. Just one thing I wanted to get clear in my head: the picture you showed of the O'Donovan headstone. Am I right in thinking that's in Mount St. Lawrence? It wasn't actually said, I think, but I wasn't sure. I think it's Mount St. Lawrence.
That's correct. Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Okay. That's wonderful. Thank you. Yeah. Okay.
Right, thank you very much, Patrick. Bye bye.
Okay. Thank you.
Henry, I wonder would it be worth pointing out to people that the door there behind you has some of the bullet marks in the door?
Yes. Thank you, John. They're on the back of the door, are they?
Yeah. Well, you can see it there, yeah.
Oh yeah, yeah.
Really?
Oh yes.
Yeah.
Henry, get out of the way.
Oh, I see.
Henry, you need to move.
This way.
Henry.
Sorry. Yeah, the bullet holes there.
Good Lord. I see. Yeah. Yeah. Good heavens. Good heavens, after 100 years. Yeah.
So unfortunately, we can no longer use it as a door in Shannon House because it's not a 1 hour fire rated door. But we will be mounting it probably to a wall in some fashion that it'll be there on display.
Okay. Okay. That's interesting.
Have we got any more questions?
Henry, Colin Martin here.
Yes, Colin.
How are you all? Look, thanks very much. Very interesting. Learning some stuff now, the local history that I wasn't. I knew a bit about it, but certainly, the detail is very good and certainly very informative. So thanks for that. I was just interested on what was mentioned there is very clear. I mean, the idea that the auxiliaries start bringing along a Lewis gun and shooting up the place after the initial shots. I have no idea, but I presume a Lewis gun is a big
machine gun.
Is it a kind of a two-man operating kind of thing on a?
It's quite a substantial gun. Do you take 2 people to carry it, will it?
No, one.
One
person. Okay, all right. And is it a kind of like a Tommy gun type of a thing, or is it kind of a belt? Would it be able to? What sort of? How many rounds would it kind of churn out? And
I'll put you on to the engineering department.
If you can actually, I'm sure if you Google, you'll see an image of it. It was a British machine gun of the First World War, and shortly thereafterwards, it's quite a long machine gun, and it has a circular drum on the top of it, which I think held around 50 or 60 bullets. So it was a fairly substantial piece of machinery. It was not the kind of thing you'd be using in close quarters in a hotel. If I can put it.
Yeah, it seemed. I mean, again. Oh, thank you for that. Yeah,
you have some images coming up there now. Yeah.
Okay, very good. So the idea, or what they were saying, is like this seemed to have taken approximately half an hour. Are we saying is that, effectively is that they were streaming in, continual gunfire into the hotel over a
It was an actual. The three RIC officers were actually in a bar, which would have been the end of a corridor.
Yeah.
So they were firing from the corridor effectively, and I understand from outside as well.
Leslie Shiner pulled the pin out of a grenade, and only for he copped on in time. He didn't throw the grenade, he threw it out over a garden wall. Now, can you imagine letting off a grenade inside in an enclosed space? It'll tell you the mindset of the auxiliaries.
Yeah. So I think Stafford Cripps himself, or not Stafford, William Harrison Cripps himself was of the view that he considered up to 1,000 shots were fired. So he said it went on for a considerable period of time. So I think there was approximately 60 auxiliaries. So
there was 45, 20 of them were uniformed, 15 were in civvies.
Yeah.
Now, the point was, Neville McCready, in his assessment of the operation, he said that the auxiliaries had a window. And he also said that they should not have been going out on an operation in civilian clothes. So as I said, they were breaking all sorts of rules. Now, it was very clear that when they charged into the hotel, they were supposed to go in quietly and observe what was happening. But they didn't. They charged in with their guns drawn. And it was McCready's assessment that they had the window. Now, it's no surprise that a few weeks later, that these boys are shipped from the lights of the hotel in Killaloe down to a former workhouse in North Clare, in Corofin.
Right. Okay. I suppose the last thing I think of is that given the amount of shots, it's actually surprising so few fatalities occurred as opposed to how many. Would not be fair.
It would, but the question has also been asked, had the auxiliaries been imbibing in Killaloe before they arrived in Castleconnell? And if they had, that wouldn't have helped their aim.
Yeah. Very good. Yeah, thank you. Thanks for that.
Are there any more questions?
Hi, Henry. This is Anna Flynn here. I'm here with Jean Spillane.
Yes.
Just to say that we thoroughly enjoy that, and it's so well organised. And just to say, it's very interesting to hear from the families as well. I suppose just from my own personal point of view, my mother would have recounted to us the story. My mother was Mary Mescal, as you know, from Mescal's shop in the Spa. And she would have recounted to us, a story where her family was burnt out in Ballina in Killaloe in the month of December. I'm not sure of the year, but she was born in 1915. And she says she was about 3 or 4 when it happened, just 2 days before Christmas.
These incidents would have been talked about for many years afterwards.
Yeah. But her father, they were looking for her father that night, but he escaped by getting into a boat and coming down the river. And he came to Anthony Mackey, as you know, in Castleconnell. So that's how they ended up in Castleconnell. That's our legacy, I suppose. We're in Castleconnell. But we thoroughly enjoyed it. Thank you so much to all the speakers.
Thank you, Anne. Thank you indeed. And we remember your mother tonight also.
Thank you.
Are there any more questions?
They tied him to a haystack after that.
I think that's about brings us to the end of the thing. I think it was very significant to have held it, and thank you all for participating, and Owen from coming from Dublin, and for Tom, for Christopher, and also for Nigel Warburton for participating, who gave us another aspect of the event. Thank you and good night.